It's already Thursday. We have not really been through the Big 12 bowl season at all and how people finished and how they looked. And, there's a couple of teams that kind of rated by the portal and opt-outs, but for the most part, everybody was playing with as full of a deck as you wanted. And so I do think we can glean some things from bowl season from the Big 12, like particularly starting with the Armed Forces Bowl. We know that Baylor has a lot of places they're deficient at that they have to get better before spring football starts.
Yeah, fortunately got to take some vacation time right after this one ended. Didn't have to be on air to talk about this one because I think the feeling leaving the stadium, other than just wanting to get warm, was – let's never talk about this game again if we don't have to or relive it. I do want to say, as much as we'll probably dump all over, the weather and just the performance by Baylor, I did see a chart the other day that, calculated with whatever formula. I'm not good with math and all the ratings and everything else that comes out, but it basically showed that Air Force dominated that game, like one of the two most dominant performances of the entire bowl season. So even if you want to look at halftime, it was kind of sort of close. It was clearly all Air Force, and the score wasn't indicative. And then in the second half, they finally made the score look like it was more indicative of the actual showing. So that was one of the two most dominant wins of all of bowl season, was Air Force beating Baylor. So it was as bad as we thought, if not possibly worse. The weather sucked. The weather absolutely ruined what would have otherwise been just a better atmosphere and probably a more fun game to play in. Air Force, obviously, far more well-equipped to deal with a little bit of adversity, especially something like cold. But that just made it just compounded the negativity that was already emanating from the showing itself. It was a bad performance for Baylor. And at the same time, very fitting for just encapsulating the whole season and how the whole season basically felt. But I did want to mention that that's not a knock, the bowl game experience itself on the folks at TCU. They did a great job. That's a cool venue. That's a great stadium. And I thought that they did, really well given the circumstances. And they weren't planning for whatever the temperature was, 14-degree weather, wind chill, -2 or whatever the craziness was. So just shout out. I know we got some listeners that work over there in Fort Worth and at TCU, and I ran into a couple of them. I just want to say we appreciate the hospitality and the setup and all that. That was not an issue. The game itself was not very fun from a Baylor perspective, and it's now led to all these changes. I mean, there were changes before with Ron Roberts, and now we know officially Matt Pallage is the defensive coordinator. That's the change that's happened since then. Obviously, there's been some maneuverings in and out of the transfer portal by Baylor, and they've got a lot more moves to make. They got to hire an inside linebackers coach. And they also have to figure out who's going to run special teams, because I did notice on Pallage's bio, he does have safeties next to it, so he will be DC in safeties. That was to be expected. But, just not very good on offense, not very good on defense either. Started out physical, started out with some excitement, I thought, at least defensively, but that went away rather quickly as Air Force just stayed on the field, running it down their throats and even throwing it on them pretty much when they wanted to as well. And just a very forgettable, bad game. Kudos to Air Force. They went out there and did their thing, but for Baylor, I think the best feeling you got of the entire night was once the final whistle blew, you're like, thank God this season is over with, because it was just that kind of a year where the offseason was needed, change is needed, and we're seeing that happening now. But Air Force dominated, and that was really disappointing to see Baylor go out like that, but that was a very fitting way for them to go out.
Yeah, and we said all week, it was cliche, but does Baylor, with all the things that were going on, the weather and a 3-game losing streak and guys getting potentially getting in the portal and just the way that the season ended, how much are they invested in this game, and how much do they, even subconsciously to me, because sometimes you're a player, you don't really know that you don't want to be there right until, you're in the third quarter, it's 23-7, and what would have normally in normal circumstances been like, well, this is kind of surmountable. Like, we can do, that's not a problem, and we've done that before. Seems like, I don't know how we're ever going to see the ball again with this offense who just keeps running it for 4 yards at a time and has, picked over us in the passing game, which we didn't expect. So then all of a sudden your gumption is kind of gone, right? And
I think they came out like fine as far
Yeah.
as defensively to begin things, but it was
9
the
to
fact that they led the game off with a 3-and-out after all that wait and all this talk, and like you're excited about them getting out there, and you realize that it's going to be cold and miserable, and Baylor's going to have to run the ball. But they started the game immediately with the 3-and-out, and then Air Force goes on a 15-play touchdown drive that lasts nearly 10 minutes, and you're like, okay, like you knew that's what they do. But the fact that you gave up a drive like that right after going 3-and-out, and it was just cold, and it was all of a sudden like you could immediately tell, like, all right, it's going to be like this, and just didn't have a lot of hope after those first few minutes, even though it was still somewhat close at halftime. It was 9-7 at halftime because they scored right before the half, and you thought that would maybe kickstart something, and that was saving grace. It should have really been down 9-0, but that didn't amount to anything. Except for just scores later on in the game that were kind of irrelevant at that point. So, yeah, that was a bad performance. And as Dave Aranda said, man, like we're sitting there in TCU's digs in the post game, knowing the season's over with, and he comes walking in there with Dylan Doyle. And, I mean, he said it himself, a disappointing end to a disappointing season. And I think that's how everybody feels. So next year, with the moves they've made and will continue to make, it's going to be super interesting to see where in line they fall, because we've seen 2-7, we've seen 6-6, we've seen 12-2, and now we've seen 6-7. So does that mean they're going to win 10 plus games next year? They don't have the roster right now, it appears, to do that, but we know a lot of things are in the works, so we'll see. But that was a season that is not going to be one that comes to mind quickly for a lot of Baylor fans when you ask them, like, what was your most enjoyable season? This will not be ever mentioned ever. Most people will look to forget this season, quite frankly.
Craig, you mentioned inside linebackers coach Christian Robinson he's on staff. I mean, he's the new linebackers coach.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
So they do have him there. I think the special teams though is who's doing that.
I was blanking on the fact that he filled that role, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so he's in it. Thanks to DJ for reminding me of that too. I mean, I thought it, and then I thought, well, maybe he's not because sometimes there's inside and outside, and maybe somebody's whatever. But all right, so moving on to the team in the Big 12 that I'm the most confused about, and I think most people are right now, is Oklahoma State and what's going on there. We've talked about it a little bit, but the bowl game was kind of a microcosm of that. Look, you already knew that Richardson was coming into the portal, and the day before that game said he was committing to Baylor.
The day of
the day of Baylor's bowl game, but the day before Oklahoma State's bowl game. So you don't have Dominic Richardson. He's gone. You knew that anyway, and it just showed me that the depth that Oklahoma State has behind, they struggle with that injuries and all that all year long, but they have some real depth issues. Quarterback Garrett Rangel didn't play well against Wisconsin. None of their quarterbacks that were not named Spencer Sanders played well at any point when they had to play this year. And there's a ton of guys in the transfer portal. And this game kind of made you think even more, something weird is going on at Oklahoma State. And I just would like to know why it seems this way after it seemed like it was going fine just a year ago.
Yeah, I really don't know. I think that's what everybody's kind of searching to figure out right now. And, you look at that box score, and, Dominic Richardson's already, having made up his mind that he's going to be heading to Baylor. But, now you look at it again, and there's some guys in there, that were part of that box score that have already now, with John Paul Richardson, for example, and plenty of others that have already announced now that they're leaving since then. And so, you kind of like that John Travolta meme of he's like looking around the room for somebody. That's how, or the Will Smith, Fresh Prince of like looking around the empty living room. It's kind of almost like that in a way. So, yeah, I don't know why all this is happening the way that it is. There's been a lot of back and forth speculation on Spencer Sanders and whether or not he's actually going to go somewhere else, or whether, there's been scuttlebutt that maybe he could return, and that now we're into the point of like reading his tweets and trying to decipher them to the point where he had to say like, hey, I'm just a guy. Like, not everything is related to Oklahoma State football.
Yeah.
A smiley face is not like indicative of I'm coming back to Stillwater or I'm leaving Stillwater. And so like they're in that period right now of just trying to find any sign or symbol of where this is ultimately leading. But yeah, I mean, Luke Fickell on the sidelines for Wisconsin was really, sort of strange to see him there that quickly and already being, the head coach, I guess, so to speak, even though Jim Leonard was still kind of technically it was just, we talked about it yesterday with the Wisconsin. It was just kind of weird, not in a bad way. It's just sort of strange. But yeah, like technically Luke Fickell gets his first win against Mike Gundy as Wisconsin head coach. And, they scored a touchdown early in the game. And then after that, I mean, it's Wisconsin just kind of took control. So I think Oklahoma State is in a very strange spot, to state the obvious. The bowl game didn't really tell me one way or the other which direction they're going, other than it was just also fitting that they lost because, it would have been kind of weird for them to have the season they did and jump up and beat Wisconsin. That also kind of would have been a bowl season thing because that's –
Well, look, Wisconsin didn't have all their guys either.
Right. It's
so
bowl games are bowl games. Like, you don't know who's motivated, who's not. Like, does it matter? Does it not in some cases? So if they had won that game – they could still be in this very same situation that they're in, but it was more fitting that they lost because that's how this year went. And so 7-6 is where they fall. And just with, very little momentum and tons of questions now heading into the offseason. And you really have to wonder, like, how long is Mike Gundy for this job at this point, just given the years that we've seen and all the, the ups and downs. It does kind of feel like we're at a point now where it could go up again, but like, how excited would people even be by that, and how much longer would that even last before they're going right back downhill again?
Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see how they respond to all this stuff. And look, Oklahoma State's not added anybody, but they're gonna have to add in the portal because they need a quarterback. But don't know who this is going to be. I know there were some Brennan Armstrong rumors there, but I don't know where he's going. I don't know where Spencer Sanders is going. And there have been a lot of guys who are on that level or maybe even a little above who, like Sam Hartman, kind of came and went into the portal since those guys have been in it. So,
The thing is that Gundy's been, like we were talking about the up and down, like Gundy's been down before, and then, last year he's in the Big 12 championship game. Yeah. Like, they're going to the playoff, dude, if they win that game, right? So, like, that was so close to being something different and totally different from what it is now. I mean, in just a year's time, being inches from the playoff and Big 12 champs to now, like, what's the future? And half that team being in the portal. I do want to give Oklahoma State credit, though, for fighting and making it a close game by the end. Like, they had an opportunity. That wasn't like they went out there and got embarrassed and blown out or got embarrassed in the level of, like, what Baylor did. Like, they scrapped back and fought back after digging a hole and had the ball at the end of the game with an opportunity to try to make it a little bit more interesting and, throw an interception. So that was unfortunate. But, I give a lot of credit to or Gary Gale through that interception, but I give a lot of credit to them for fighting those guys that are left over, and I just wonder now what's next for this team.
Yep. That brings us to what I think is probably one of the most ridiculous and fun bowl games of the entire bowl season, which was the Liberty Bowl for Kansas. And it was that was a microcosm of Kansas this season where every game was going to be exciting for the most part. They're going to be in most of it. And look, they got in a game, I don't think the end result of 55-53 for Arkansas or Kansas is indicative of who's a better team when you go to dueling 2-point conversions into overtime. It just, who worked then. Not a great, not the best play call by Lance Leipold at the end of the game, but you also start running. Here's the deal, though. Like, I heard them say this on the broadcast, and it's been rattling around in my head when I think about this game ever since. They said, you only have so many play calls, that are 2-point conversions. Yeah, but, like, you also run the same play again during the game, right? So if 27 trap works, you run it until it doesn't work. So I think that was maybe an oversimplification of, like, maybe there's, only so many clubs in the bag for the 2-point conversion. But I do think that as you look into the future, into the offseason with Kansas, like Jalen Daniels coming back, like, they've got so many good things going for them right now that I think that bowl game, even in a loss, just, it's kind of what the future is going to be for them, which is probably, as long as Lance Leipold is there, it can be pretty fun.
Yeah, so long as fans don't get spoiled super quickly, which I don't see why they would, other than just that's how fans everywhere can be, is like you get a little taste of winning even after a long time, and all of a sudden you just crave that, and now you get to the point where you go from craving to expecting it, and that's not really how it works. And even if you want to point at Blue Bloods, that's not really how it works for them either. Like, what's the national title drought now for Ohio State? Right? Like, how long since Oklahoma's won one? I mean, they've won a lot of games and lots of titles, but, I mean, it's a hard thing to do, man, is be really good and really elite every single year, year in and year out. And so Kansas got a nice starting point. They've got some momentum. They got some feel good and some positives. And they had a great game that, somebody had to lose, unfortunately. They did get very lucky, I guess, in terms, of one of the calls in this game that certainly opened up and allowed this game to be a bit more competitive than it might have been otherwise. And I know that was a big sticking point with Arkansas fans, but, just taking the refereeing out of the equation and, valiant fight from Kansas to make this, an entertaining shootout and a game where, we're sitting there on the tip of our chairs, wondering who's going to be able to make that one more play in overtime as overtime just continued on. But Jalen Daniels threw for nearly 600 yards. Problem was he was throwing the ball so much, they weren't really running it much. Meanwhile, Arkansas was running it all over Kansas' defense. I mean, they have 400 rushing yards in that game? Something close to it, right? Mm-hmm. Arkansas had like 1 billion rushing yards, so it was a tale of one team throwing it all the way around and another team just running it all over. But a lot of points, very entertaining, other than if you like defense and you were just cringing at what you were seeing. And yes, there's an argument to be made that it shouldn't have gone as deep as it did. But Arkansas, I think, was the better team when all was said and done, and Kansas didn't really have a whole lot to hang their head about, and they got to be excited that Jalen Daniels will be back and some other guys as well. But they got a lot to build off of from this season, and it should be fun to see where Lance Leipold takes them next.
By the way, on the chat room, S. Michael DeHart just said, "Look, if this would be if we were like an old school like afternoon, like maybe music FM thing." He said it should be 365 in the afternoon with the Dragon and the Italian.
Okay.
So
there we go. I like that.
Yeah, look, we could go back.
The Dragon nickname.
We came out of radio to this. So we could easily go back into that world, and it wouldn't be as fun, but I could.
I mean, we could. I don't know if I will or ever even. I'm not even. That's not even a thought in my brain. To be perfectly honest with you, you just put it in there, but that's not even. That'll go right back out the other side because I'm perfectly content. But yeah, we've been there, done that, and maybe in a.
An alternate universe?
Alternate universe, yes, like in the MCU. That's what we're doing. Yeah. But 394 rushing yards for Arkansas. That's something that Lance Leipold is going to have to work on this season. Yeah, obviously, if offense is fun. Jalen Daniels, great, but need to stop some people.
Yeah, you got to get in their way. You got to at least. I mean, they were a defense at times that you thought, look, guys. Why don't you just let them score in a play so we can get the ball back? And let's.
Well, quite frankly, Arkansas gave up 500 plus passing yards too. So for all that defense talk, neither side really can hang their head all the way on a full defensive showing. But that was a very entertaining game when all was said and done, and good win for the Razorbacks.
What would scare me in the Big 12 about Kansas going forward is that this was another game where they fell way behind early in the game. It was 24-7 after the first quarter, and they just don't go away.
Yeah.
They don't ever believe they're out of it. Look, they almost came back and beat Baylor when they were getting throttled in that game. They've come back and won other games this year. That is something that, and when a team has it, they're always going to be scary because you cannot, they're like the slasher guy at the end of the movie, we throw him off the cliff and he hit the rocks, and then you turn the corner and he's just crawling up the mountain, still doing fine. That's kind of how Kansas was.